Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Dorsey, a psychologist in Silicon Valley and the host of Super Psyched, a podcast dedicated to supercharging your life. Each episode contains fun, high-quality interviews with experts looking at psychology from all angles. Super Psyched is your tool to get more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't. Quick question. When it comes to math, what's easier for you, addition or subtraction? For most of us, I'm guessing the answer is addition. While you may think it's because we learn addition before subtraction, another part of the answer is less apparent. For our survival, we have been primed to seek more, and we have an aversion to the idea of less. Yet all of us know that less truly can be more. When is that true? When is that not true? How can we override our tendencies to acquire when it's actually not good for us? My expert guest answers these and many other questions related to the science of less being more. Leidy Klotz is a professor at the University of Virginia's Schools of Engineering, Architecture, and Business, where he's part of an initiative merging the fields of engineering and behavioral science. He's also the author of a book I loved called Subtract, The Untapped Science of Less. Thought leaders of all types love the book, including Super Psyched guest Dr. Barry Schwartz, who said, "Subtract is simply brilliant." So listen in as Leidy and I have an engaging and user-friendly conversation about the untapped science of less. Dr. Leidy Klotz, who has asked me to call him Leidy, welcome to Super Psyched.
Thanks, Adam. It's great to be here.
Dude, I am so happy. I loved your book. We're here partially because when I was reading Yael Schonbrun's book, the part about overriding our cognitive bias towards adding more is better is kind of how we've been programmed throughout the millennia, has been challenged by, ostensibly, by your 3-year-old who was playing with some Legos, at least per your observation. And I love the fact that you have written this book and contributed to the literature in this way. I would love to get into that. But before we even do, it's really funny to just consider your background. You are a professional soccer player who has scored goals while being paid for it. You earned a doctorate and became a professor, and you're tenured. You're also an author. So you've definitely done a lot of addition in your life in very good ways. And yet you've also been able to cite so many examples of where subtraction is necessary and will lead to far better outcomes, whether it's the waterfront in San Francisco, which we may talk about, or towards contributing towards the end of apartheid. Brilliant. Just anything about you before we even get started that maybe the listener might find delightful or interesting.
So my kids call me Dodo. Well, all the kids in Charlottesville call me Dodo because when Ezra, who had this bridge epiphany that I'm sure we'll talk about, was just learning to talk, he was like combined Dada and Bodo's. So Bodo's is like the go-to bagel place in Charlottesville, and he and I would go there. And so he called me Dodo, and he didn't know the other meanings of Dodo at the time. So it's just stuck. And eventually he realized that it was funny. And now all his friends call me that. And yeah, that's something about me.
I love that. So yeah, one of the most appreciated and decorated professors goes by Dodo behind the scenes. And I think that's just gorgeous.
Sometimes in front of the scenes when I'm annoying if my collaborators have little kids, then they will know that's a nickname. And then they will use it when I do something that isn't impressing them.
Yep. It's funny to listen to somebody like Conan O'Brien, as I regularly do, who's the king of the world as far as I'm concerned, but at home, dressed down. And for sure, I'm perpetually dressed down at home as well. Yeah. So I have my own version of Dodo, I'm sure, with my kids who think that daddy's very funny and complete goofball.
Yeah.
The genesis of this book, how did you even decide, you know what I'm going to do with my most precious asset, my time? I'm going to write a book about subtraction. How did you develop the conviction that this was the thing?
Now you're making me second guess it, whether I should have spent. No, I think
it was a great choice, dude.
It's fun. Yeah, no, it was. It's proven to be a great choice. And I'd written one book before. I liked writing, but I was telling myself I wasn't going to write another book until both of my kids could at least clothe themselves and we would not have to change their diapers. But then before our second kid was even born and Ezra was still in diapers, this really interesting thing just came to me, not in my brain. I'd been thinking about less is more and minimalism and elegant designs. My background's in engineering and in architecture. So I've always been interested in those kinds of things. But when I realized this like framing of a question, like why don't we subtract things as a way to make them better? It was just like, I have to write a book about this because people need to know this. We're finding out this really cool stuff with the research. Plus what we've learned with the research just opens up so many new questions, right? It's like, okay, so long story short, people do in fact just like think of adding first, right? We use adding as a substitute for thinking. It's like, okay, why? What are the biological reasons? What are the cultural reasons? What are the economic and social reasons? And then like, what can we do about it? And so it really felt like an obligation. It's like, okay, you've got this finding. It's cool. We're the only ones who have it. And you've thought about it more than anybody. So just like, let's put a stake in the ground with the current state of the thinking and let people run with it from there. And so that was why it made it through that really hard filter that you mentioned of like, hey, time is a finite resource and you're going to spend it on this. You're not going to be spending it on something else. And it's proven to be time well spent.
I agree. And just having read the book and having enjoyed it, and it's been considered a must read on many lists. And I agree with that. And it really speaks to, as we were talking about that cognitive bias to acquire, we have been really evolved over the millennia to acquire and to have the plus sign. Even when I think about a plus sign versus a minus sign in my mind, I think plus is green and minus is red. And plus has a nice sound and minus has a rather cacophonous one. More of a wah, wah. And plus is like, yay.
Yeah.
So that's where I go. Is that fairly consistent throughout the population?
Yeah. I mean, like one of the things that I found with this helpful framing that we were just talking about, it's like, okay, how do people feel about these words? And it turns out that there's like the same way there's a valence around a molecule, right? There are valences around words, and people can analyze a whole bunch of words on the internet and seeing what kind of other words are grouped around them, determine if they have a positive valence or a neutral valence or a negative valence. And like most of the words have either a positive or a neutral valence. And of course, as you mentioned, subtract has a negative valence. It's not as bad as moist, but it's negative. And what that means is, we hear it, we're like, oh, that doesn't sound like fun. And I knew that when we titled the book Subtract, but it's like also, it makes it that nobody else has a book titled Subtract because it already has this negative valence. So hopefully like one thing is to kind of turn around that valence, because it's a misconception, right? It should be fun. It can be fun. It can be positive. It can make things better. And so the negative valence is kind of holding us back. So yeah, that's pretty consistent across the population.
And as I was thinking way beyond Marie Kondo, just in terms of my own life, the things that I've subtracted that have given me pleasure or sometimes the solution to making something actually usable or more usable is by doing a little surgery on that item and taking something away. There have been many things that I've kind of customized in my own life. I'm certainly far from an engineer, but I've found that sometimes there are things that are superfluous and best cut away for better optimal use. I'm wondering, what are some things that you have noticed that people can do to improve their lives through subtraction?
It's funny because I'm more of an academic engineer, and that like when I'm engineering stuff around the house, that's when the dodo term comes out a lot. So we share that. But I think, just as simple as not watching TV, right? I mean, that's a subtraction, and it's obviously freeing up time for you to do other things. And so when people ask me like, oh, well, you played soccer and you got a Ph.D. and you wrote a book, and it's like, how'd you do that? And it's like, yeah, I mean, I was born on third base with good parents in relatively stable economic situation and so on and so forth. But I also just I didn't watch TV, which freed up a lot of time to do these other things. And so I think, whether it's TV or some of the other things that we spend our time on that may not be like pulling us towards the vision that we have for ourselves, those are the kind of specific things not specific, but that's kind of a rule that helps you realize what you might be able to subtract. Does that make sense?
100%. And I love the idea of looking at time as an opportunity cost and recognizing where do we sink our attention and our time. And so many of us think that there are things that are necessary that really are not only not necessary, but probably actually even toxic, deleterious to our lives.
Yeah.
I'm even thinking about my corporate experience. You and I were talking in the green room, shall we say, about me being at a sales conference at one point. And I remember these sales conferences definitely went with more is better, which actually I believe had correspondingly negative outcomes for the year. What we would do, probably not unique, is we would start meeting at around 7 a.m. for breakfast, and we would go pretty much pedal to the metal until 7 p.m., just jamming ourselves with information and directives and management by objectives and all types of things. And we were exhausted. And after a night of alcohol consumption and going to sleep for far too little time, rinse and repeat.
Yeah.
Did that help our outcomes? No. What did help my outcomes was actually I wrote down 3 basic activities that I must do every day as a sales rep. I wrote them down just to remind myself. And I basically put some packing tape over those 3 directives and I looked at it every day. So it was 5 days jam-packed to the gills versus 3 little things. And I know that you spoke about this. Your sister is apparently in the ER doc. And one of the things that we know is that less is more in terms of being able to triage, right, and figure out like what's important at any given time. And I'd use that same idea when I was doing my doctoral dissertation, boiling it down to the basics. And you come up with repeated examples in Subtract of how that will actually cause us to kick ass. How has subtraction caused you to kick ass?
I mean, one key point that is highlighted in both of those examples, like the triage example, I can't apply triage. If I'm the one applying triage, that's going to lead to a lot of deaths. But my sister running through her filter of all this expertise that she's acquired, and then you subtract it down with triage, deciding where people are going, what treatment they're getting. It's the same with your sales stuff, right? It's like you gain all this wisdom and accumulate knowledge about what works and what doesn't in sales. And then you run it through your filter of the 3 things. And I think what that does is it just keeps us focused, right? Everything is like this big complex system now, and there's a lot of moving parts, and it's really easy to get distracted by something that's going on just because it's drawing your attention and you take your eyes off the prize. So that same thing has helped me in my life. I mean, readers can't see it, but you can see it. It's like I've got my triage list here of the things that are important for me. I think also when you're setting your priorities, thinking about things to stop doing, right? So, hey, here are my tasks for the week. Here's what I think is really important to accomplish. And here are the things that I've been doing that I don't need to do anymore. I mean, I think that kind of forces this subtraction to be top of mind for you in the moment.
That's awesome. And one of the cognitive structures that I've used in order to be more focused, I'm very out with the fact that I have ADHD, and focus and structure has been crucial to me, as it's crucial to anybody, frankly, neurotypical or not. But this phrase caused me to subtract in my life in a profound way. And that was simply the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing.
Right.
I love that. The main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. I'm not sure, some people attribute to Stephen Covey. I have no idea who is the originator of this, but it caused me to filter, like, is this part of the main thing or not? And if it's not, I'm not doing it. And I guess that when I see your list that you just showed me of your own personal triage, that these are the main things.
Yeah, it sounds so simple, but I think if you're really honest with yourself, how much time are we spending thinking about what our North Star is and really clearing away the clutter from that? Are you doing this because it's the main thing, or are you doing this because it's somehow pleasing somebody else, or because it's the path of least resistance, or because the main thing is hard, or because you don't know how to do the main thing yet? So I think that's so true. And I think, that question that I get asked so much is like, hey, what's the right thing to subtract? And if you've read the book, so it's like, I'm not very forthcoming with like, here are the 60 subtractions. That's the follow-up maybe, but it's the way to know what to subtract is to know what the goal is. And then you're subtracting what doesn't get you to the goal. And to go back to, the Marie Kondo example, she does an amazing job of giving people this vision of the tidy living space, both in her writing and in her process. She forces people to visualize that. And now that everybody knows who she is and has seen the results of her work, you're visualizing that immediately when you think of her. And so then it's really clear what to subtract. It's like you've got this t-shirt, there's a little sentimental value, but you haven't worn it in 5 years. It's like, okay, that's subtracted t-shirt. You keep the ones that have sentimental value and you actually wear. So it just gives clarity by having that vision. But so often we just don't have the vision. And I know it's hard, right? You're asking people to figure out, what do I want in 5 years? Or what do I want at the end of this work cycle? And it's, the vision evolves, but you got to have that picture to know what to take away.
Dude, I love that so much. And I'm thinking about Daniel Gilbert. One of his books I refer to as delicious as candy, Stumbling Upon Happiness, I believe, or Stumbling on Happiness. I forget the exact title. But it's like all my pleasure hormones just go off. I've probably listened to it 5 times. But he said that if he was to boil down his one summary of the human condition, it is that we are poor predictors of what will make us happy in the future. And that our prediction machines called brains are not very good at that. And one of the things that Marie Kondo, as well as your book, really call for is honing in on what will make us happy. So I think that the cards are kind of stacked against us. We have this cognitive bias that predates our birth of more is better.
Right.
We also have this other issue of we are not very good at predicting what will make us happy.
Yeah.
And Marie Kondo has brought kind of to the surface, and you very astutely note, and she corroborates that this is not necessarily scientifically backed, but it works. And I'm sure there's been science to corroborate it since then. But how do we override the fact that we're bad predictors as well as loaded towards acquiring? And how do we get true? How do we get real? How do we know what to carve away? Are there any strategies that a person can use? Because it's obviously not a one size fits all proposition, but are there some questions a person might be able to ask based on your experience to themselves in terms of what to whittle away?
I mean, getting back to the reason I wrote the book, it's like the first and foremost is like, is subtraction even an option here? And am I thinking of it? And that is all these times in our life when we're like, how do we want to make this situation better? Whether it's a physical thing, whether it's a social structure, whether it's the ideas that are in your head, we have this basic option, which is we can add things to the situation as it exists, or we can take things away. So am I remembering this whole category of options that could be beneficial for the task? Now that people have listened to this podcast, they will remember it. The book hopefully rearranges your mental furniture a little bit to help remember it. But then can you build in reminders into your process that force you to remember this? So I mentioned the stop doings that I have when I'm kind of doing my time prioritization. That's an example of a reminder that I build into the task. I talked to one organization, and after I talked to them, they said they were building this into their like annual reporting. So the annual reporting worked like, here's what I plan to do this upcoming year. And now they were also encouraged to report what they were planning to stop doing this upcoming year. And that's a big shift. It forces people to think about it, which of course you can't just keep doing all the stuff you're doing last year, plus add on new stuff and do it well. But it also kind of shifts this perception about subtracting, where it's like, okay, you're not doing it because you're lazy, or you're not doing it because you're not competent enough to do it. And instead, you're supposed to be thinking about things that you're not doing. So the reminder works in both ways, or the building it into your process works in both ways in terms of like bringing it to mind and then also making it an acceptable, even a desirable thing to do. So I think as you're listening to this, I mean, one thing you can do is say, hey, where do I make decisions in my life that are important? And how can I build in a reminder so that I don't forget that subtraction is an option there?
And where are some places where addition in your experience is good? And where are some places where perhaps we should really strongly consider subtraction? What are some general things?
In general, there's a case to be made because we've been adding for so long that subtraction is untapped. That's why that word made it into the subtitle of the book, that in this market of improvements, we've been underusing systematically one option. So I think there are a lot of places where changing behavior, for example, we often, when we go to change behavior, whether of ourselves or of people that we care about, we think about how do you add things to change their behavior. So this could be rules or incentives. So it's like, okay, my son, trying to get him to eat a more healthy diet. And so we say, all right, man, if you eat the vegetables, you can watch a half an hour of TV. So that's adding an incentive, or adding a rule would be you have to eat the vegetables every night. That's adding a rule. And like removing a barrier would be something like, okay, what are the things that are preventing this behavior in the first place? What are the things that are already in place that are causing this behavior that you could get rid of? And so it's like, okay, if we're giving him cookie snack at 4 or letting him eat whatever he wants at 4, is that, detracting from his desire to eat vegetables at dinner? So we could just say, okay, we're just not going to have the cookie snack or whatever. We're going to have apples during that snack. So I think you can think about this in all forms of like behavior change modification, right? Removing barriers. And, this is a case where subtracting is better, right? Because if you add those incentives, if you add the rules, you've still got the forces working against the behavior in place. So what you're doing is just like adding tension to the system. And I think going back to the example with my son, right? It's like, okay, the example where if you eat this, you can watch the show. So I haven't removed any of the things that are making it hard for him to do it. I've added an incentive. He still doesn't want to eat the vegetables. Maybe he'll eat them and watch the show. But if he doesn't eat them, now he's not just like not eating his vegetables, but he's like disappointed with himself that he's not getting to watch the show. So it adds all this pressure, and all that tension is still in the system. So in that case, like if you take away the force that's preventing him from eating the vegetables, it could be better. Does that make sense? You probably have a better example from your work.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure it was better, but I mean, I'm thinking about various examples where certainly that old idea of less is more. I'm thinking about the fact that Apple made a blockbuster of a phone by getting rid of a keyboard.
Of course. Yeah.
That is massive.
Yeah. And that's an example of all these people putting all this money into trying to figure out how to make the best phone. It's not like people didn't realize there were profit opportunities there, and the subtraction was the difference there. Strider bikes is another product design example. I don't know if you have those.
Loved that example. And personally, I benefited more from that one little thing. My kids learned how to ride a bike so quickly. We don't even need a Strider bike. We just actually just took the pedals off and had them walking around.
Oh, really? Yeah, that's awesome.
So to the listener who may not be familiar, one of the ways to get a child to learn how to balance and learn how to bike really fast, not fast on the bike, but quick in terms of the learning curve, is to remove the pedals. Now, do this safely. This is not me stepping outside my lane and saying do this, and lo and behold, your child gets hurt. But it seems to be fairly safe, but do this under the supervision of somebody who knows what they're talking about. But it worked for both of my sons fast by getting rid of the pedals.
Yeah. And the kids just walk along on top of the bike, and it is fast in terms of learning, but eventually they get pretty fast in terms of riding too. And the whole invention there is that you got rid of something, and all the innovation in bikes over the last 100 years before somebody thought of this is fatter tubes, fatter tires, more gears, more accessories, all these bells and whistles. And it's like, well, this subtraction made bikes rideable by a whole new age group and saleable to their parents. And I mean, we joke about it. It's not a joke that this is an influential invention. I mean, seeing the look of determination on the kids' faces, seeing the physical fitness that develops. My personal trainer told me that this is good for their core too. She's like, oh yeah, the way they sit on there, it's like amazing for their core muscles. I was like, whatever. And then I was talking to the founder of Strider Bikes, and he actually has a nonprofit arm of that organization dedicated to getting more kids riding bikes. And there's some ridiculous amount of kids, only like 20% of kids ride bikes now or something like that. Don't quote me on that exact number, but he says he will go into schools in like the Bronx, New York, and no kid will know how to ride a bike, right? So there's this whole generation of people who aren't even getting this amazing experience of riding a bike, which I don't know. I just remember that as one of like my first experiences of freedom, right?
So 100% love being on a bike. So many great memories attributed to that. So let's go into a fun place. And that is, I'm delighted to ask you this question if you're willing to answer. And that is, you've experienced something that very few people have. And that is, you have scored a point. You've scored a goal in a professional context. You were playing for a professional soccer team in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
I got it correctly. And you scored goals. So you know what it's like to have your endogenous hormones going bonkers. You've had that experience of like, I can't even imagine the adrenaline, the dopamine, just everything that felt. And then you're not doing it anymore. I'm wondering about that subtraction. How have you been able to...
That's a horrible subtraction, Adam. No, go ahead.
How did you reconcile subtracting being a professional soccer player? Because I'm just thinking that this would be such a rush, that it would be so addictive that there's no way you'd ever want to leave. How did you subtract that?
I mean, certainly if you could be in a permanent state of having just scored a goal, I would never want to leave that state. I was not Lionel Messi. I mean, I was making like $2,000 a month, and which was good for post college and was paying the bills, and I was getting to see a lot of places. But I was also, in addition to scoring goals, some weeks I would practice all week and sit on the bench for the whole game, which that's horrible. So it wasn't all just scoring goals. But yeah, I can't provide a nice answer about, okay, this is the thing that provides that same feeling in my life now. Certainly there are different emotions that don't come all flowing out at once, like scoring a goal. I mean, I would never say scoring a goal was better than having a kid, but having the kid, that just is different over a longer period of time, different kind of levels of emotion, different ups and downs of emotion.
A longer burn.
Yeah. Another really enjoyable thing about sports is working at something and seeing the effects. So many times in life, you can like work on something and maybe the benefits aren't apparent right away. And in sports, it's pretty controlled. So it's like if you practice something during the week, you might get to work on it in a game. And hey, if I spend a few hours on this skill, like I'm able to use it and I perform better in this, admittedly artificial, but it's a performance. So it's like you kind of learn that work has payoffs, and also that the work itself is fun, right? It puts you in a lot of these flow states of people are like, Leidy, why'd you practice so much? Like, oh, actually, I liked it. Like there were parts of it that I didn't love. Sometimes it was hard to like get out of, whatever I was doing and go practice. But once I was like practicing, it was fun because you're like working at the limits of your abilities on something that is enjoyable to you. And so you can kind of recreate those experiences and those habits in other environments, whether it's my writing is really good for that. Doing research is really good for that. Working with students is really good for the kind of teamwork elements of it. So that's, again, I've never had an experience. I don't expect to have an experience like scoring a goal, but some of the other enjoyable parts have been transferred into my non-soccer life.
And I'm guessing that rather than completely creating tons and tons of shrines to your past, that there are moments that you can kind of even tap into. That was fun. And I'm enjoying being a father now. And I'm also enjoying perhaps using some of the same technologies or strategies or disciplines that allowed me to excel at soccer while doing my doctoral dissertation, while being the father I've always wanted to be, while conducting this research, that those skills, those neural pathways are still put to use in important ways, even if they don't elicit the same immediate hit of dopamine that scoring a goal does.
Yeah, definitely. Exactly. That's a good summary. And I actually think that of course, it's nice to have those memories and those are things that'll never go away, but also thinking too much about them hasn't been helpful for me in the present, right? It's like, okay, this is cool. This is in the bank, but it's in the bank. And now it's like, what's next? I think it would be really hard, I guess, to be like, imagine if I had made like $10 million a year, both years that I played professional soccer, and I didn't have to make a contribution. I would still need to do something that felt meaningful for the rest of my life. I couldn't just like sit on a beach and think about how fun it was playing soccer. I don't think that would work for me. I doubt it would work for most people. I think like you realize that the joy is in the pursuit, in the process, in the trying your hardest at something and to make meaningful change in the world.
The biggest accolade I can give somebody is that they are a geek in their field. And that comes from the intrinsic nature of the joy of doing it.
Right.
And yeah, so you and I both are fellow geeks, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
And when you were into soccer, you were a soccer geek. Now you're a fathering geek and a geek in your areas of academics, as evidenced, at least in part by how much you publish, which is amazing. Before we get to my final question, I just wanted to give a shout out to something you said in the book, which answered a question. Every listener can't imagine anybody knows this. And you've got to read this book because there are so many delightful, delicious moments. And delicious is the proper word because I'm talking about the donut. Why does it have a hole? And it basically talked about the fact that that's the only way it could cook evenly. Is that correct?
Yeah. There are all these apocryphal stories of how the donut got its hole. Like, for example, there's one of this guy, Hanson Gregory in Maine, and he is like, some of the versions of the story have it like impaled on, envision a ship's steering wheel and the little thing sides that stick off. So it got impaled on one of those and that popped the middle out and they realized it made the hole better. But so again, like fried flat dough, been around for a while and people realize, okay, you pop the middle out, it cooks more evenly and you can like spread powdered sugar on it. The reason I use it in the book is because we talk a lot about the advantage. What's hard about subtracting, right? It's harder to think of. Sometimes there's not a nice balance around it, but this is an advantage. When you subtract, you've got the thing you've subtracted plus the new and improved thing. So you can make use of that dough that isn't used in the middle of the donut, as evidenced by donut holes. You can sell donut holes. And if you don't put the keypad on the Apple iPhone, you're saving money.
As you're talking, I'm just realizing I'm a former math teacher, and it's easier to do addition than it is to do subtraction. And we learn that first. So it's easier in terms of a cognitive task to do addition than it is subtraction, which has got to have something to do with something to do with.
Yeah, I think there's some overlap here. I mean, like one of the things I talk about in the book is we have this like numbers sense. And it's like the point that the people who study this make is it's like very much like our sense of taste or smell. It's like innate, our sense for quantity. But that innate sense for quantity is kind of relative, not absolute. So for example, like if you're a hunter-gatherer, the difference between like 1 and 2 mammoths is bigger than the difference between 8 and 9 mammoths, which kind of makes sense, right? Because like twice as many mammoths is more of a difference whether you're going to like hunt or be hunted than whatever 11% more if it's the difference between 8 and 9 mammoths. But anyway, I think there's something there with how we're able to do math that is related to the adding and subtracting.
Yeah, 1 to 2 is 100% more mammoths and 8 to 9 is just like 12.5% more.
12.5. So, okay. Yeah. You got
that's not much more.
Yeah.
Well, my man, so grateful for you sharing your time and your expertise. I've got one last question for you. And unless there's something I should have asked but haven't.
I'm so appreciative of you sharing your time to prepare and get these ideas out there. I think of what I do as like creating and sharing knowledge. And I think there's a whole infrastructure to sharing knowledge. And so I really appreciate your part in that and getting it out there in an authentic way. So give me the last question here.
Thanks, bro. Here it is. If by chance you had magical powers to confer upon all humanity one insight or skill that would dramatically improve the lives of people and perhaps even society at large, what would that insight or skill be? And how do you imagine it would affect people individually and perhaps collectively?
Yeah, I think it would be the desire for lifelong learning. And I don't mean that in an academic sense. I mean it in all the senses. That can come from reading books. It can come from just paying attention to the world around you. It can come from taking the thoughts that are in your head and thinking about which ones don't make sense. But I think just that continuous improvement in how we think about the world. I imagine obviously the benefits for an individual are pretty clear, right? Well, maybe they're not super clear because I think there's one benefit that's just like the pure productivity benefit. You'll be better at whatever you're doing. But I think there's also a real joy benefit that people maybe don't get to experience. It gets back to the soccer thing where it's like you're doing something at the limits of your ability. It's a really joyful thing to be able to be continuing to learn. So that's the individual level. Then I think the societal level, I mean, that frame of like continuing to learn opens all of us up to realizing that there is more that we can learn, and maybe keeps us a little more open to other people's, other cultures' perspectives, which certainly can't be a bad thing. And I think it's just one of those things, we've got more opportunity than ever to do it, right? There's just so much information out there and it's at our fingertips. And I guess the question is like, how will we use it? Will we be just bombarded with what other people want us to see, or will we like be intentional about it and go out and continue to learn in the way that we think is beneficial? So that would be my one wish. And yeah, you're certainly helping people with it, Adam.
Well, Leidy, what a nice thing for you to say about me, and what a great thing for you to wish upon all humanity. I think that you may have actually cracked the code in that the dopaminergic activity that transpires with learning something new that's meaningful is akin to scoring a goal. Maybe not as big of a spike, but man, there is a stoke that accompanies learning something. And I am stoked to be learning with you, and I can't wait to see what's next for you. So glad to have met you and to have a new friend on the opposite coast, dude.
Yeah, likewise. This has been awesome, Adam. Thank you.
Right on. This is Dr. Adam Dorsey thanking you for listening to Super Psyched. If you know anyone who might like it or who might benefit from listening, share it. And if you like the episode, please hit subscribe.